And it was, kind of like a Q&A, I guess, like a Dear Amy type of thing, but put together by teenagers, for teenagers. And it was in that book that I, for the first time, saw the reference to an organization called Alateen. Then that gave me the courage to tell my mother that if she didn't want to necessarily go, and ask at Al-Anon for help to deal with our alcoholic father, I really wanted to go to Alateen and have a community of people that were my age and learn how they were coping with that. In that same book, which, when we think about it, this was in Puerto Rico, because I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico. It was a very religious, setting. And that book also was the first instance in which I saw a non-stigmatizing definition of same-gender attraction. So for someone like me, who I'm queer and genderqueer, to see for the first time the possibility, of thinking about the attractions that I was dealing with, presumably on my own and alone from any other queer and queerness, also coming from a very Catholic and strict background, that perhaps there was a different way of thinking about myself on that regard. And, many other books offer themselves as sliding doors into worlds of possibilities that I did not feel existed for someone like me in a world that was very constricted by very strict gender roles in ways that were not fitting to me. So these instances of mirrors are seared into my memory because for the most part, who I was and how I felt was invisible. As a college student, also at the University of Puerto Rico, I also experienced the invisibility in a different way. I could not see my communities reflected in my fields of research. Not from a ban, or an actual ban, but because research on topics of ethnic and cultural minorities was not considered, the height of science. And there were also not necessarily the necessary resources, for us to have mirrors on that regard. So as someone who was, that absence of a mirror was kind of like a black hole. And as someone who was studying to be a psychologist in a University of Puerto Rico setting, to hopefully help my communities, not being able to see who we were and how to help ourselves meant that we had to learn how to deal and how to treat people who were not like us from a different perspective, and not necessarily have the right tools to deal with it. So how my faculty dealt with that, which was a very committed faculty member, was into working on doing research on culturally adapting some of these treatments, and also creating ways of seeing ourselves that were also not from a deficit model. So for an island that is still experiencing the effects of colonialism, as psychology students, we were taught that to help our people, we needed to use the same perspectives that were steeped into racism and ethnocentrism. And my faculty were trying to make for that gap, but because there were no mirrors. So without texts as mirrors, what we learn about ourselves often echoes the discourses that are prevalent around us. And for many marginalized communities, those discourses are of oppression and deficit. Without texts as windows, we are prevented from challenging the unidimensional stories that surround us, inhibiting us also from learning to connect and respect to other stories that are not our own. And with those sliding glass door books, we're thwarted from transcending our so-called boundaries and experiencing solidarity, which is very much needed in this world. So I'm very excited about the presentations and discussions that our panelists are going to be bringing today. Thank you for being here, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Dean Sharon del Rio, for that very sort of thoughtful and thought-inspiring and personal and political testimony that I think centers our conversation today. So thank you. Before we proceed, I want to thank the Frederick Ewan Academic Freedom Lecture Series for sponsoring today's event, as well as the events this week on Academic Freedom. And with that, it is my honor to introduce history professor Gunja SenGupta, who will lead us in conversation.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Hi.
Thanks, Dean Sharon Del Rio, for that very powerful testimony. I'd like to start by seconding your hearty welcome to our fabulous students, members of the audience, and our distinguished speakers. To this very first session of 2024 Hess Week, featuring the eminent historian, Professor Paul Ortiz of the University of Florida. Now, before I introduce the speakers, I want to take just a few moments to sort of go over some housekeeping points with you. If you are a student and you didn't get a chance to sign in as you entered, please do sign when you leave. You should also know that this event is being live streamed and will be posted, a recording of it will be posted on the Wolf Institute's YouTube channel. And following our remarks by the speakers, we will be taking questions on the central theme of this panel. And because I see so many of my amazing students in the audience, I know you will have a few things to say and to ask. I also want to urge you to attend other events related to Hess Week, and you all have a program, so you know what they are. Allow me now to take just a moment. I know we're anxious to get started. I just want to take one moment to note that Brooklyn College actually has important connections with the central theme of this panel, which is the freedom to learn. Because a great defender of that freedom was once chair of the history department at Brooklyn College in the 1950s. In fact, we were talking about this at lunch. His name was John Hope Franklin. He was one of the architects of African American history. And when I was a student, actually growing up in India, I learned to place African American history at the center of my understanding of all things American because of this path-breaking textbook that John Hope Franklin wrote, From Slavery to Freedom. I just want to let you know that, Franklin believed that learning can make a better society, right? Once you understand that structures of oppression and inequality didn't fall from the sky, drop from the sky, right? That they're not natural, that they're actually man-made. You can turn knowledge into a resource and a strategy to make a better society, right? So this vision of activist history, for example, linked Franklin's scholarship with the civil rights movement, without which many of us who are first or second generation Asian Americans would not be here, right? The changes in the immigration law of the 1960s had everything to do with struggles for Black equality. And so Franklin, for example, helped submit legal briefs in the legal briefs about the 14th Amendment during that landmark case which overturned segregation in public schools, Brown versus Board of Education, which you know about. And so now, more than ever, when truth-telling in history is under assault, we need a courageous, activist history which dares to tell what Franklin called the unvarnished truth. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers in the order in which they will speak, after which please do ask questions and offer comments on the central theme of the panel. First, Emily Drabinski. She is the president of the American Library Association, associate professor at the Graduate School. Associate professor at the Graduate School of Library and Information Studies, Queens College. Nishani Frazier, who worked with John Hope Franklin is Professor of History and Director of Public History at North Carolina State University. And the man of the hour, Professor Paul Ortiz. He is Professor of History and Director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Professor Drabinski, the stage is yours.
I didn't realize Nishani was from NC State, so you had like a great basketball weekend, right?
All right. Men and women.
Yep. Men and women, it was inspiring to see, but that's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. So my name is Emily Drabinski. I'm a professor here at CUNY and the current president of the American Library Association. For those who don't know, ALA is the world's largest and oldest professional association for librarians in the world. We are the second largest trade association in the United States, and we have been for, I think it's 148 years now, an institution that, while rooted in the same kinds of exclusions as any American institution, has fought generally and in ways that we need to do more of for the right to read, the right to learn, the right to imagination, the sovereign right to one's own mind. I've been very proud this year to serve as president. I am the first openly queer president of the American Library Association, and I'm myself as somebody who saw who I was in books in the library, so I really appreciated your remarks. So they've asked me to speak for just about 10 minutes, and so I'll try to keep it there. You don't need me probably to tell you that we are living through an extraordinary moment in American history when it comes to organized attempts to ban and censor reading materials in schools, school libraries, public libraries, and in academic libraries in a way that I think we haven't yet begun to reckon with. And I see some of my academic library colleagues here, and that's a conversation we need to have, and I look forward to having it with you when I'm done doing all of this, 3 more months. But I think the numbers, which are striking and alarming since 2021, which is when I began service in this role, or in a role related to this, we have seen year-over-year doubling in the numbers of titles that are challenged and in the number of registered challenges and attempts to censor materials in libraries. The numbers are alarming. That 4,000 books number, each one of those books was written by an author for a group of readers that a teacher or a librarian was put here to connect those two, right? And so that's just the scope of that, and what that has erased from the possibility of our public imagination is staggering. But I do want to tell you a little story that I think encapsulates how this is even a bigger problem than just the book on the shelf. So I've lived in New York City for 30 years, and in Brooklyn for 26 of those, and I'm not quite a New Yorker, but I'm getting pretty close. But I'm from Boise, Idaho. Has anybody here been to Idaho? You've been there, maybe you've heard of it. Okay, so it's one of those potatoes, yeah, definitely, a lot of them. It's gorgeous, and it is a place where we saw a women's basketball team in northern Idaho get assaulted with racial epithets just at the basketball tournament this weekend, right? So it is also a state, as much as it's full of natural beauty, it has a long history of being a haven for white supremacists. Hello, everybody from Idaho watching. I know there are good people in Idaho, but there are challenges there as well. So there's a librarian in Idaho that I got to know a couple of years ago. Her name is Kimber Glidden, and she was the librarian at the Boundary County Public Library in northern Idaho, just a little bit south of the border with Canada. She had gone to that library from Alaska and just wanted to do what librarians want to do, solve problems. You know, that's what libraries do. We solve problems. We are institutions inside of communities that are full of resources, and it's our job to distribute those equitably among the public and ensure equitable access to information and the public good for everyone. So she's working in Boundary County, and one day she has someone come into the library, and this is the story that we've gotten used to, with a list of 500 books that they would like to see removed from the library collection. And these are lists of books that are circulating among organized pressure groups around the country. These are like sort of authentic concerns about a book that might be in the library. These are organized lists, and so they come to her with a list of 500 books demanding that she remove them from the collection. How many of those 500 books do you think were in the library collection in Boundary County? Goose egg, I see it in the back, Beth, thank you, 0. None of the books were in the library. Now, that's another problem that we need to have a different conversation about, like why none of those books are in the library. But I do think it speaks to the fact that the censorship challenges that we're seeing have little to zero relationship to what is actually happening in public libraries in America. So Boundary County, she gets this list of 500 books, and it's not as if the list came and then she said, oh, we don't have these books and it was over. No. Northern Idaho has been taken over by organized extremists at almost every single level of the government. If you were here earlier, you heard us talk about the sort of move towards fascism in this country. There are parts of this country where it's already arrived. And Northern Idaho is one of those places. So something called the Redoubt Movement, which is one of these organized extremist groups, has seen Northern Idaho as a place that was friendly to them. And in Boundary County, they had taken over every arm of the local government, right? They owned the mayor's office, the city council, the school board, the sheriff's office, because sheriffs are elected, not the police office, because they aren't, which is like another conversation, but, and the library had not been taken over. So they brought Kimber the list. They showed up at library board meetings with weapons, brandishing guns. They followed the library staff home from their offices, parked outside of their homes with weapons. They blew a large horn at one of the meetings. I'm not sure why this is like a thing that they do, but they blew a large horn, which was threatening and terrifying. And things got so intense in Northern Idaho that not only did Kimber Glidden have to quit her job, right? She resigned because she didn't feel safe working there anymore. But in the state of Idaho right now, public insurance companies are opting not to insure public libraries because they are spaces of such intense threat, right? So that's like what's really happening in Boundary County. So she leaves. The library is now a shell of its former self. The staff are aligned with the extremist political sensibilities of the people who run the town. And you no longer have a library that is built for everyone, which is what libraries are for and what libraries are about. So as we talk about the banned book story, I think it's really important to connect what's happening in the library with what's happening to our public institutions writ large. So we don't want to end up in a situation where we're fighting for a single book, because what we're really in the middle of fighting for right now is the right to a public good at all, and to the public institution that I think does the best job of facilitating equitable access to that, and that is the library. So I'll say a few more things. The book ban and censorship attempt that we're seeing in libraries takes a few different forms. It takes the form like this one, hostile takeovers of the library, hostile takeovers of the board. We're seeing record levels of adverse legislation in states that would criminalize librarians for circulating materials, that are we have 3 states that have seen legislation, and it just failed in Georgia, but there are 2 more bills outstanding in Oklahoma and Louisiana that would prevent any public money being spent on anything related to the American Library Association. We have that all of that is happening, but then I also want to make sure that we think critically about the other book ban effort that's very highly successful, including in a place right here like CUNY, which is continued gutting of the public funding of these institutions. And the best way to keep books out of the hands of people is to shutter the library altogether, or to cut its budget to the extent that you don't have the staff necessary to connect readers to books, or the books themselves on the shelf to give to readers. I also like to end on a note of hope, because otherwise, like, what gets us up in the morning? So I wake up every morning and I think, did we win yet? Right? That's the question I wake up, did we win yet? Because I know we're going to win. We're going to win because we're right. We're going to win because everybody agrees with us. And I see evidence of that winning everywhere. So the American Library Association, as I said, we are committed to fighting against censorship and have put a huge amount of resources there. We have a public-facing campaign called Unite Against Book Bans, which I encourage everybody to check out and join. And that's a platform we use to organize big entities like like ALA and Pen America and Penguin Random House, but also individuals. When you sign up for the platform, when we see a book ban action happening in your area, we will mobilize you and get you out. Because everybody agrees with us, right? Everybody wants a world where their kid can read a book. Nobody, you can't be against it. You walk into a public library, you think, you know, like the Brooklyn Public Library, they're running, I don't know if you guys know about this, but they're running an online French class right now. Any adult in Brooklyn, for free, you can join an online French class and learn French with a bunch of people in the area. It's amazing. You can't be against it. So everybody's for it. So we need a way to pull everybody together on behalf of libraries, and Unite Against Book Bans is one of those platforms that we're using to do that. It turned out 400 people to a school board hearing in New Jersey a few weeks ago, where the school wanted to move books about puberty out of the youth section into the adult section. We're also seeing, I think, a lot of really exciting fights, like when the right chose libraries as the place to organize. We see other parts of the community organizing and fighting back. I had an amazing conversation just a few weeks ago with a new group called Read Freely Alabama, where it's not just librarians and supporters of libraries, but people who are looking and seeing what extremists are doing to pick apart their cities and dismantle the sort of institutions that we all use to get together and have lives that are more than just survival. And that small organization has organized a pretty significant anti-book ban movement in Alabama that's winning. We're seeing something similar in Louisiana, their Coalition Against Censorship. Louisiana has the highest number of adverse legislative bills in the country this year, and that coalition has been doing astounding work pulling people together to fight back legislatively, in the courts, and through direct action in the streets. Libraries are where the fight is right now, is where my fight is, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to have this afternoon. Thank you.
Professor Frazier.
So, I don't know, can you all hear me? Okay, I'm not used to the microphone. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to sort of being up like in front of y'all. And the other thing is I can't see time here, and like Paul said this morning, I'm a professor, so somebody better stop me. 10 minutes is up, or we could be here quite a while, especially as I get myself going. Talking about this particular subject, and it's one of a kind of personal importance to me, but I ended up having broader political implications for poor Paul. So Paul, I apologize in advance. So my name is Nishani Frazier. Not only am I director of public history program, but I was a member of the curriculum development committee for Advanced Placement College Board for African American Studies. So AP African American Studies for short, the boogeyman for Paul. I'm sure you would sort of understand it in that way. When I first started with AP, actually was in 2010, and I was actually a regular reader. I was working for the Advanced Placement U.S. History, and our focus was on grading exams. So it was a fairly sort of basic, poor assistant professor job, right? Over the summer, I get a little cash, I read the student papers, I edit and evaluate. But in 2015, we ran into a little hiccup because AP U.S. History had come under criticism from conservative groups who were unhappy about the new edits to AP U.S. History, insisting that these edits were un-American, unpatriotic, this should sound familiar, and that this was not reflective of the U.S. history that should be taught or that students should be required to learn. And in that moment, College Board, I'm trying to find an intellectual way to say this, but folded is just, you know, I'll just go with that. It folded. And the only reason that it didn't stay that way is that it immediately got pushback, right, for its decision to make some of the changes that it did to the U.S. history. And we call AP U.S. history APUSH, to APUSH. So you would have thought that that would have prefigured in my mind when I joined AP African American Studies, but it didn't quite figure in the same way. It was really on the periphery of my mind until I ended up joining for the Curriculum Development Committee. And at the time, I was more excited about the sort of profound nature of AP African American Studies. And most people don't know about this course, right? Why it was so important. It was one of the most requested courses, right, among students and teachers. So this project, this course, was not some, as a lot of conservatives constructed it, right, some woke effort on the part of AP College Board. It was actually coming up from the community, from the students, from the teachers themselves. And it was a powerful course. It was doing things that other courses had never done before. One of the things that it did was that it was multidisciplinary. It's African American Studies. So students had to understand U.S. history, they had to understand literature, and they had to understand art. And if you speak to your professors, all of whom who focus on one of those disciplines, they will tell you that one of those disciplines is enough for any student. But what we were asking was so much more. It required historical thinking skills. It required a level of data analysis, visualization, critical reading and thinking. It was a complex course, and I frankly was really proud, right, at the work that had been done. But the other unique component is that AP African American Studies course has stepped beyond the exam to add what we call a community project. And this goes to the heart of African American Studies. The work of African American Studies is to bridge from the discipline and the academic space to the community and back and forth. There is no African American Studies without the people. And so this was the first course that required that the students had to engage all of these ideas and concepts that they had learned in the academic space within community. How did this apply, right, to the issues, circumstances that were impacting their lives? How could they connect it? So there was a second portion to the course where they had to do a project after the exam. And the project would also be considered in combination with the exam. All right, very unique in terms of its thinking and restructuring of AP, which AP was dragged kicking and screaming, like, we don't do this. And our response is, you do now, right? Congratulations to you. So we were actually quite happy with the circumstances of what it was that we had built. We had gotten feedback from a number of scholars across the field, sociology. Of course, everybody was not happy. If you got a whole bunch of professors in a room and told them, okay, form a syllabus, you know, only one would be left standing when you came back in the room, right? We just go to battle it out. That's just the way it is. But that's okay, right? It was still something that was respectable, all right? And I was very, like I said, honored to be a part of this process until about January 2023, I think, 2022, where we started to hear a little bit of noise about some dude in Florida who was insisting that changes had to be made in order to fit the expectations of a proper African American Studies course. And ironically, my response was to laugh. I just actually come back from Germany, and they said, well, you know, DeSantis is saying he's going to ban the exam because it doesn't have this, it has too much of that, and I just went, well, it's too bad because it's in. Is it in there? And then I went back. And in the going back, and in the reviewing, it turned out that College Board had once again sort of pulled a push moment and had begun to make changes to it, of which we were not happy. And part of that had to do with the pressures that were coming out of Florida. And those pressures included a number of subject matter that they considered to be antithetical to understanding the nature of American history, culture, and society. One of those, of course, was critical race theory. And critical race theory, to be clear, was not just under attack when it came to AP African American Studies, it was under attack by conservative forces in multiple states. All right, so this was part of an actual growing set of circumstance that AP College Board didn't realize they had sort of thrown fire on. Now, let me just say, they were told, but being told and then actually accepting are two different things. So critical race theory had been under attack, and it became also clear as we looked at the unfolding challenges to critical race theory that critical race theory was really a euphemism for all things black, right? Mm-hmm. That anything related to black history somehow was antithetical to the American story, and so critical race theory became this kind of baton, this bat, that they utilized again and again in tapping down AP African American Studies and its acceptance by the state of Florida. But there were other areas that were also missing in the text. One was sort of black radical resistance in a post-1970s period. So that included particularly Black Lives Matter, but it also excluded the South African apartheid movement and other activist moments, right, that had occurred in that sort of rise of Reagan and the rise of the right. And then the third thing, which they had excluded, was anything related to queer history, queer community. And that was one that I found particularly upsetting. They had removed Baldwin. They had, obviously they had removed Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, but they had removed Baldwin. They had removed Pauli Marshall. They had removed Combie River Collective statement. And some of you might, if you've seen it, you know that it was actually put back in there. Needless to say, that came with a lot of tension to even put it back in there. And I think what it did was to set off this kind of frenzy, right, in which conservatives, in order to reflect, right, their own sort of reputation of standing against wokeism and standing against these un-American courses, was led to a kind of domino effect, where DeSantis was followed by the state of Arkansas, followed by the state of South Dakota. There were over 14 states that moved to ban AP African American Studies outright. No review, no revision. What was less discussed was the effort by other states to amend the course, to make changes to the course, which was deeply problematic, to say the least. But the other failures by the circumstances were not just a function of what was happening with critical race theory, right? It was also what was happening internally within AP College Board itself. The College Board had failed to really listen, and of course, as Paul and I would tell you as oral historians, listening is critical, right? It failed to critically listen to the Curriculum Development Committee in preparing them, right, for the forces that were at stake. College Board did not quite understand what it meant to do a course like this, that the existence of the course was a challenge to whiteness on its face, and that to do that meant you stepped into a certain battleground, which meant that in that process, you became the enemy. And AP College Board didn't see itself as the enemy, right? It's a company that is, or nonprofit company, billions of dollars that it makes. It's quintessential to the average high school student and their ability to be able to get college credit, right? It is embedded in the structure and system of the United States public education system. So of course it doesn't think that you can get rid of it. Of course it did not think it could be challenged, despite the fact that the subject matter was going to be a site for contention. So there was a failure to listen to the Curriculum Development Committee, but it was also a failure to listen to the community, right, and their response to the importance of AP African American Studies. And it was a failure to listen to the students and the teacher. And here is where I want to kind of sit for a minute, right? The failure to listen to the students and the teachers was perhaps the most deeply problematic aspect of College Board, all right? That in the decision to choose who would be the guide, it wasn't the teachers and the students, it was this conservative political apparatus, right? And so it failed to do its job in servicing the students who were, in fact, their constituency, right? I think one of the things that we need to think about in talking about what they sort of failed to listen to was the impact of the AP and African American Studies. We piloted the course 2-3 years it's been piloted. I think it's going into its third year. And so AP College Board, in its fear of DeSantis, responded to DeSantis. But the students and the teachers were saying something else, and it was powerful. The teachers had already confirmed that because it was interdisciplinary, students who took AP African American Studies first and then moved into another course of AP were actually doing better in that other course, right? So that was one of the things that the teachers had already made clear. Teachers had already noted that students were being transformed by the experience of this course. You had students who were empowered, their self-identity had been empowered, and not just students of color, but also for white students who had gotten an insight to a history that they felt had been hidden from them, that they didn't have an understanding of the complexities of American society and culture and why there was division, and all of a sudden they had a course that opened it up for them. And a lot of these students, quite frankly, also did it in challenge to their own parents who did not want them to take the course, right? And of course, that's a real issue right there, right? Some students had decided that they were going to major in African American Studies as a result of having done this course. How am I doing on my time? I'm gonna wrap it. Okay, I'm gonna wrap it. That's why I said you better stop me.
You're absorbed in the talk, though, which makes it so hard.
Yeah, you know what? I won't be offended if you usher me off the stage. I'm in New York, so if you do the Apollo thing, I won't be upset. But so I'll wrap it up. What I really want us to sort of think about, and this is what my father told me, and I think this has been my sort of guiding sensibility. Whatever my criticisms of AP College Board, and let me tell you, there were a lot. What I was always clear about was the impact and power of the African American Studies course on these students and their lives. What I was always clear about was the way in which, as my father constructed it, the AP course was the beginnings of a silent revolution, is what he talked about, right? And so when we talk about sort of the freedom to learn, right, it's not just the sort of the politics of trying to block, or the cynicism, right, of conservative forces and trying to push a political agenda. What they're really afraid of, right, is the revolution. The power of changing the psyche of these students. The power of changing the psyche of their own children. And I think when we think about the work of AP African American Studies, in spite of our criticisms, we need to think about this silent revolution.
Professor Ortiz.
You. How's everyone doing? Good. Trying to take a stretch moment. Great session. Well, I'm going to provide a little bit of a viewpoint from the state of Florida, where I currently live, and there's both hopeful moments and there's challenges. But first of all, let me just reiterate for those who were not able to attend the welcome session this morning how deeply humbled and honored I am to be here with such incredible, distinguished colleagues, student staff. I'm blessed to be this year's Hess Scholar at Brooklyn College. I love this place, and you have just been so welcoming to me the entire year, whether it was on a Zoom session or in person. So again, I want to thank my dear colleague, Augustin Alonso, the World Institute, and so many just amazing new friends that I met this year. My my path to becoming a Hess Scholar is quite extraordinary. It intersects with the themes of this session. And, you know, I didn't grow up to become a university professor. I mean, I grew up in a shipyard town. We were called shipyard kids. I'm a third-generation U.S. military combat veteran. We were not told we could go to college when I was growing up. No one talked to us about college. Our parents were either too busy working, sometimes 3 jobs, to be able to help us with homework. So whenever I hear that phrase, well, you know, kids whose parents are too busy to help them with homework, that's so terrible, terrible, I'm like, that's how we grew up. But you know what institution was always there for us? The library. It was always there for us. And this movement that we're facing today, and there is a growing fascist movement in the United States of America. The 2 most important institutions, I think, foremost in fighting that are libraries and trade unions and public educational institutions in general. For us as kids, even if we didn't do well in school, and believe me, I did not do well K through 12. Quite embarrassed, but I did not take, I'll just say I did not take advantage of my K through 12 educational opportunities. But the library was always there for us. And starting I don't know how I ended up doing this, I skipped so many days of school. Every semester, my siblings and I would have like kind of a game we would do. And if we could skip 14 and a half days of school without getting kicked out, we would skip like 14 and a quarter. I guess that's how we learn fractions. But where I started skipping was I started going to the library, okay? Because the library was sanctuary for us. It was a place of quietude. There was no gunfire in the library. There was no violence. There was no one yelling at us. And the library became, to me, like a church. And I remember the other great stroke of luck I had, the only AP course, Professor Frazier, I ever took in my entire high school life, quite by accident, was AP English. And that course, I would say, literally saved my life, because in that course, I had a teacher, Don Bidwell, who assigned to us books that he said right off the top, at the beginning of the class, were banned. He told us, you will not find Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five in your school library. You will not find it in your downtown public library. You won't even find it in a bookstore in Bremerton, Washington. You're going to have to go to Seattle to get this book. Sylvia Plath, Bell Jar, Richard Wright, Native Son, William Faulkner, Absalom. All these books, J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, I can go on and on. He said, you know, some of these books have sex in them. A shipyard town, sex? We never heard about that. And so the first ferry, we would take the ferry to Seattle, okay, we didn't have cars. You better believe I was on the first ferry to Seattle to get these books. And I still have them to this day. Books are dangerous. Nishani used the term revolution. I want us to kind of think about that word. Books are revolutionary because we can do to them what we will, and sometimes we can even read a book that our parents may disagree with. Oh my God. Oh. You know, and another thing, Nishani, which I think will warm your heart, and I think you know this already though, is that when Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida announced the ban in AP African American Studies, and this gets to a point that both of you touched upon, immediately our students all throughout the state of Florida, K through 12 and college students, and people connected to universities, the first thing they did and we did was organize a statewide walkout in support of AP African American Studies. The Dream Defenders contacted the United Faculty of Florida, AFL-CIO, and it took us all of 3 minutes to decide that we were going to participate in this walkout. What we could do as educators was we could do teach-ins where we would spend, you know, an hour or two talking about African American studies. The teach-in we did at the University of Florida, organized by the students, my dear university kind of tried to stop it, but guess who made it happen? Our union librarians. They opened the space, the university came, tried to talk them us out of doing it. We said, thanks, but no thanks. Our students want to be educated. They want to learn African American studies. So we did a 3-hour teach-in. I've done teach-ins my whole academic career. The students, there are hundreds of students there to learn African American studies. We connected them to different resources in our library, our oral history collection, the databases, the platters, all sorts of different archives. It was such an incredible, inspiring, oh, my time's already up? Oh, I thought you were taking me out. I thought she was going to escort me out. Which would be fine, by the way. But it gets to the point of that the audience, the demand for gender studies, for queer studies, for Black studies, Latinx studies, Asian American studies is at an all-time record high. I know this because I do curriculum development work with school districts all across the country. And I've done it my entire career, especially since African American Latinx history has come out, all over the place. I can't keep up with the demand. The reason is that middle school and high school students and their parents and their teachers and librarians want these types of histories taught. And just a few years ago, I may have worked with some of you in this audience. I was approached by educators in Connecticut. The students, middle school and high school, Afro-Latino students in Connecticut went to the state legislature and demanded a new curriculum in Puerto Rican, African American, and Latinx studies. And we had a series of like 2-year meetings. We made that happen, and the curriculum has been put into place, okay? And it's been a big success, and it gets back to the point of that people are demanding this kind of history. They're demanding these types of studies. The whole notion of critical race theory, as you know, it's been banned in Florida, it's been banned in other places. Anything critical. Why? Because people in power don't want you, especially younger people. I'm kind of a little old for this now, but they especially don't want younger people to know how power is created and how it might be challenged or even dismantled. They don't want you to know how to do this. And that's what gender studies teaches. That's what critical race theory. I mean, look, if you believe the status quo, if you believe everything your professor or your president or your elected official tells you, I tell people you don't need to become an oral historian. Okay, just live your life, be comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. But if you think that something might need to change a little bit or be shaken up a little bit, then you're going to want to learn things like labor history, like Asian American studies, et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of worked up now. I'm going to try to do something. The danger we face is that states like Florida, this reactionary movement, and it's not conservatives, it's reactionaries. Conservatives want to preserve institutions because they believe people spent generations building those institutions. I'm old enough to remember what the term moderate Republican meant, okay? They're almost all gone now. And I can tell you as a former union president in Florida, that's how I made my bread and butter, was working with moderate Republicans. They're almost all gone. What you have now are governors and state leaders and business leaders who want to tear stuff down. So let me give you one example. This is from the headline of the Independent Florida Alligator. It's our student newspaper at the University of Florida. It's one of the best student newspapers in the country. So the headline from March 25th is, General Ed Humanities courses must include, quote, the Western canon under new state law. Requirement was part of same bill that cut state diversity funding, okay? So the short paragraph here says, a new Florida law requiring all humanities general education core courses include, quote, selections from the Western canon will take effect fall 2024. The requirement was added to Florida statutes in May as part of Senate Bill 266, the same sweeping education reform bill that cut state funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Check out the pairing here. I won't comment about this except to say that the state of Florida continues to try to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, try to give DEI a bad name. The state of Florida doesn't want you learning critical race theory. It doesn't want you reading Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. That book, by the way, banned in a local high school. In my county, a county that has the University of Florida in it. Why? Oh, they said, well, there's sex in the book. Okay, that's what they always say. They want it banned because it's an anti-war book. Let's be clear about that. And hundreds and thousands of other titles have been banned. But again, to echo what both Nishani and Emily have been pointing out, is the fight back now is much more robust. Our national institutions, our unions, and especially our students and parents and librarians are banding together. The most important thing I can tell you is that if you have a colleague or a student or a librarian or teacher who feels stressed out because they're under attack, we need to be there for them, with them. We can't allow ourselves to be marginalized and individualized. If you know of someone who's being put under pressure to not teach a book or put under pressure to pull books off shelves, you need to be there for them. The last story I'll tell you is not a hopeful one, which I guess goes against what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's a cautionary tale. It's what could happen if fascism continues to rise. I got a call about a month ago from one of my last former students in Florida who was a teacher in South Florida. Most of my former students who are teachers in South Florida have now left the state because of the pressures against them. For this student, brilliant young scholar, was planning eventually to go to graduate school, but wanted to teach in their home county for about 8 or 10 years, okay? After the first year and a half, quit teaching, called me, was tears, crying on the phone. And they told me that the thing that did it was they're a middle school teacher teaching 8th grade, and the school library had been shuttered for 2 years. And the reason was that the principal was terrified of the state. The state kept on saying, we're going to inspect schools to make sure you don't have a woke book, okay? And my former student said, Professor Ortiz, you know how hard it is to teach middle school with no library? These children have not had a library for a year and a half. I just can't take it anymore, okay? So that's the cautionary tale. That's what's happening. It's not cautionary, it's real, right, okay? And so we have to be there for each other. This is no longer just an academic debate. It's not a debate about DEI versus non-DEI or woke versus anti-woke. It's a debate about how we're going to keep intellectual freedom in this society alive. So thank you very much.
Questions from the audience?
So what courses would the best for you? What worked out the best for you, Professor Ortiz?
Oh, say again?
Like which courses worked out best for you, Professor Ortiz?
What courses worked out best for you?
Well, I think that what I love about the Connecticut example, so I talked about how we worked on a curriculum where the students take African-American, it's a sequence of courses, African-American history, Puerto Rican history, and Latinx history. To me, I love that course. I love the sequence because what the students were doing is, and this is high school, I was so thrilled to learn this. I'm like, I wish I could have taken a course like this in high school. So they learn about something about West African history, Latin American history, indigenous history in the Americas before European contact, conquest so-called. So they learn kind of a mixture of the history of the Americas. So I think that course was really exciting to be able to work on.
Yeah, I found Puerto Rico PRLS exciting thing to learn about. And just being Puerto Rican Ecuadorian myself, I just thought it was important to know. Really think that lots of people helping with Latino, diaspora, not just Hispanic, but lots of other cultures that were marginalized too.
Yes, exactly. And I think it goes to, it is true that seeing ourselves for the first time is really critical. I mean, for me it was, but also seeing other people in connection is critical. So I think that's what you're saying.
And I will say this, to your point, this is kind
To your point about how impactful it is for AP African American Studies, we have had Latinx students who are taking the course, but of course they can enter into it thinking about sort of Afro-Latinx history and experience. You know, you talk about somebody like Arthur. I just came back from the Schomburg, right, doing research on Theodore
Thank you.
Schomburg, one who crafted one of the greatest collections of African American materials. And so there are ways of entry point that have been actually effective for a number of students who are Latinx to be able to plug in and pick up something and pull some of those threads, right, to relate to their experience.
How's it going there? Let's see, is it on?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I can't hear, there's no monitor. But no, and I figured maybe we'd lighten it up a bit, because you did mention seeing yourself is important, and that's why I loved seeing The Rock as a kid, because it was like, hey, Black Islander, we do exist.
Yes.
But are there any of these bands that you are particularly, fond of in their misguidedness? Like, for me, the children's book author that they tried to ban because their name was literally gay is always a good one. Or just when you bring up all the really fucked up things that are in the Bible, like you can make a great case for banning that compared to some of these. What are some that just amuse you, are a little more lighthearted in their terror?
Is this working? Yeah, I mean, I wish there was something lighthearted. The one the one where there's a dragnet and they just want to pull out every gay book. So the gay authors, I think those are good. And Utah actually had a group of people organized to get the Bible banned from a library there. But I don't think we want to do that. I try not to comment on other people's political strategies if I'm not directly involved with them. But I think the last thing we need to do is get more people trained in undermining public institutions and undermining the agency of public sector workers who make decisions. So, that's not that funny.
For me, well, no, you go ahead.
So to your point, and I'm putting lighthearted, of course, in quotes, but the Bible thing is my favorite one, I have to say. Partly because people have not read the Bible. And so they don't know sort of all the stuff that kind of comes in there, whether it's incest or all these other things. And so, I think sort of part of the sort of humor is a kind of sort of a sour kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? A doleful kind of humor, like this is so ridiculous, like we're having this conversation. But yeah, that would be it.
Well, I think for me, the only one would,
No, I'm gonna take this out because this is.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's what I'm doing, that's why, there you go.
You don't want me to whack you with that. For me, it's Joseph Heller, Catch-22. Because, there's actually quite a few books by military veterans that are on those banned lists. So that's one of them. But I think if Joseph Heller and he was around when people are trying to ban the book, but I think because it's a book about bureaucracy, he would just appreciate the gesture.
All right, so hello. Okay, so I wanted to start off by saying that this was a really great lecture, and as a Dominican American that was living in a working class neighborhood environment, I also greatly appreciated all the aspects of public education I was able to appreciate. I went through a lot of my life in charter schools where we actually got decently high-end educations. I don't think the way that they implemented the politics of the school authority was very respectful, but it was high-quality education regardless, and I'm forever grateful for that. But I'd also like to, alongside the importance of libraries in the real world and the importance they have in maintaining knowledge and providing the knowledge that we would need to better understand ourselves as people and also to understand our institutions, it is also equally as important that we're able to protect the archives of information that are commonly available throughout the internet. Because there have been recent attempts, mainly with this is more of a complicated like copyright issue and just free education in general, educational resources. But I've always had like a personal opposition. Like as much as I respect like getting money as like a person, I've always had an opposition to paid journals where they're like journals, like academically peer-reviewed journals that are locked behind a paywall. I've dealt with this so many countless times as a college student here when I was doing research papers that it was kind of frustrating. So I kind of would wonder, like, what would you think in response to like those paywall issues?
So speaking as the editor of the American Studies Journal, I'll see you outside. No, I'm so these are the sort of complications and realities of the work that we do. The problem is the library pays, and I learned this. First of all, I was a public librarian, so I rock library all the time, and an archivist. And so immediately I went to the academic libraries to sort of figure out how much these things cost. And we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars for these databases. And the problem is some databases will include a journal, some databases won't. And so the problem is, the question is your journal in that particular database, not in that particular database? And then there's the issue of the cost of the creating of the journal itself. Even in a digital framework, there are costs involved. That then goes into the issue of copyright. We use artist images. We pay artists, right, from the community. And that is not something that comes out of the sky, right? And so that's where those charges come from. Now, what we've tried to do is to think about putting our journal in the kind of databases that are available at the public library. Right, so Academic Premier is at the public library and our journals are there. But I will say that it really is a more complicated process. We don't talk about the sort of back end of expenses and why they then end up getting transferred in terms of institutions having to pay, and how institutions have to pay out of the nose to these companies that are really just gouging. Especially because the authors certainly don't get, as someone who writes, nobody gave me a check for nothing, right? I was lucky to get a piece in a journal. So those are the complications behind it.
And I just want to say one thing about that. Scholarly publishing is among the most profitable enterprises in the world. Elsevier, which is now...
Although I need to point out, it does not go to the scholars.
No, no, it goes to profit, right? It goes to profit. The problem here is profit, and addressing that is like a big, big, big issue. But just like it's, I think Elsevier became Clarivate, Elsevier was Reed Elsevier. Like scholarly publishing and weapons manufacturing are sort of parallel in terms of the amount of profit they can produce. So it's a big problem.
Wow.
Yep.
You know, we may have, we have
like
lots of hands, but time for just one.
Hey, hi guys. My question is that libraries offer a lot more resources than books to communities, and so with these book bans that are putting like libraries out of business, or like they're not open anymore, doesn't that take away from the communities? Like obviously the answer is yes, but like based on your experiences, do you see community outrage in response to their representatives taking these types of actions, and as well as like communities that have their libraries taken away, like can you describe the gap that it leaves in that community outside of just books and literacy? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? So you've got library, I can't get it off because like, oh, it just requires me to be bold. Because you're right, libraries circulate more than books. They are the primary point of broadband internet access for people who don't have it in their homes. And even though lots of us have it, tons of us don't. And I feel like a lot of our policymakers have never talked to anyone who doesn't have broadband internet. And so they don't understand that when you cut the library, and this is just one example, you're cutting access to the internet. And the internet, everything is on the internet now. And not just like everything is in like the NC State scores, but everything in like employment applications, accessing public benefits, I was talking to a librarian in Charleston, South Carolina, and during the pandemic, they had that eviction assistance program, which was amazing, but in order to access it, you had to have access to the internet, and you had to have an email address. So if you have ever tried to help someone that you know who doesn't have an email address get an email address, you know what that's like, right? It's like, you know what, we're not gonna do this. We're just like, forget it. I'm sorry, you're not gonna be on Facebook, Grandma, right? Like it's incredibly frustrating, but the library not only does it have the broadband internet, but has the people. And then Charleston, they worked one-on-one with people in the community to get them access to the eviction assistance protection monies. And so without that, you have people who are homeless and whose lives are destroyed, right? And so that's the kind of big gap, and along with all the other little ones like story time and after school programming, and there's a take a plant, leaf a plant little giveaway shelf at a library that I saw in Rhode Island. Like just the joy of the library is missing, but really fundamental stuff like that. And just one more thing on that. Kimber Glidden, whose story I told you, she now is working the night shift in medical billing at a hospital in Spokane, Washington. She had been unable to find employment as a librarian after that happened to her. So all of this destroys lives, yeah.
I would add just a couple of other quick things. I used to go to the library because I had to type my paper out. So it wasn't even just the internet access. I didn't have a computer to type out a paper, and so that was where I could do that. But also I'm in Raleigh-Durham, which is a high gentrification area, and a lot of our folks who have been thrown out are looking for places to live. So the library has also become a site for that. And then finally, one of my memories of the library was that it was the babysitter for a lot of folks who could not afford the cost of childcare, and it was a safe place that they knew their child could be.
Well, we're out of time, but shall we give our speakers a huge hand? And remind you that just because our session is over doesn't mean that the conversation is over. They're here, and there are lots of amazing events coming up. So please attend. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Never enough time.
Right, that was fun.
Yeah, it was really
Thank
wonderful
you.
to meet you, Paul.
Thank you so much. Thank you for putting over the
All right.